Hello, everyone. I think you probably caught me bopping out to Andy's music there, but I am Jen Woodside. I am a director in alumni relations, and we just want to welcome you today to our Wednesday webinar. We are welcoming today Holly Stark, who is a College of Liberal Arts graduate from 1997. She is an experienced leadership coach, team builder, group facilitator, and project coordinator. Holly excels in fostering conditions where talent and expertise can thrive and combine in a way that forms strong teams. She is particularly adept at addressing and leveraging group strengths and dynamics, as well as conducting and coaching others on necessary, difficult conversations. Holly has a demonstrated ability for getting results from leaders and teams across a diverse set of environments. Her clients include the Music Hall, Port City Pretzels, McCain Law, Malloy Events, the Kittery Community Center, Montclair State University, and Bath and Body Works, among others. Holly is a certified Gallup Clifton Strengths coach. She's trained in Brene Brown's Dare to Lead, Ken Blanchard's Situational Leadership, and Franklin Covey's What Matters Most. Just for a quick housekeeping item, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen where questions can be submitted, and we will take them throughout the session and then answer them at the end. So thanks for being here and welcome, Holly.
Thanks, Jen. Hello, everybody, my fellow Wildcats. Let's get this party started here. It is so great to be with you all today, in particular, my fellow Wildcats. As you heard, I'm a UNH alum. I met my husband at UNH. He worked there for 13 years. I have a myriad of clients across UNH. Our license plate is UNH 603. I mean, we bleed blue around here. And I know if I could see you all and hear you all, I would say it's a great day to be a Wildcat, and you would all answer back, every day is a great day to be a Wildcat. So it is so great to be with you guys. Jen, thanks for that extensive introduction. You know, what does all that mean? What do I do? I help individual leaders, I help their teams, and I help organizations really understand and define what their intentions are around culture, around employee engagement, and around productivity. And I help them assess, where are they on track for those intentions, and where might they be a little derailed from those intentions? And then I help them figure out what they need to do to really bridge that gap between their intentions and what's actually happening with their culture, their employee engagement, and their productivity. So that's where the name Talking Elephants came from. I help them understand what their elephant in the room is, and I help them lean into it instead of avoid it. And elephants in the room don't have to be problems and broken things. A lot of times the elephant in the room is that we don't really know what our strengths are, and we're leaning into the wrong things. And we need to learn what to let go of. And we need, that doesn't serve us. And we need to learn how to lean into our strengths. And so that's what I'm here to talk about with you all today. So thank you for being here. Gosh, what would happen if we studied what was right with people versus what's wrong with people? So there's a thought. And I really wish I knew what all of your stories are, what brought you here today, and what really piqued your interest. But if I had to guess, based on what I observe in my work, I would guess that this piqued your interest either because you're asking yourself, is this all there is? You want more. You want to heighten your life. You want to heighten your professional experience. That could be one reason. Another guess I have as to why this might have piqued your interest is that perhaps you're at a crossroads in your life or in your professional world. And I would say the other thing I might guess that might have piqued your interest is perhaps you're at that place of burnout. So not only are these the things that I see in my work, but I'm trained in Clifton Strengths, which is through the Gallup organization. And you might be familiar with Gallup. You hear it a lot during the height of political seasons because they have a very strong polling and researching arm. One of the things Gallup focuses on is they are the nation's leader, or actually the world's leader, in research on the state of work and what happens at work. And so not only are those things that I talk to you about, things that I see in my work as I work with leaders and teams, but also Gallup has reported to us right now that only 33% of employees report feeling engaged and being engaged in their work. So while I'm thrilled for that third of people that feel engaged, that means 2/3 of our team members don't feel engaged or are not engaged in their work. Gallup also shares that 58% of employees are feeling a struggle. They're struggling. And 9% actually claim that they're suffering in their professional life. And so that's pretty significant. And Americans' satisfaction with life, according to Gallup, is actually at an all-time low since 2011. It's starting to trend up. But those statistics also back up the things that I see in my work and what my guesses are as to why you might be here. So what would happen if we studied what was right with people versus what was wrong with people? So one of the keys there is we look at those rates of burnout that I was sharing with you, and satisfaction versus dissatisfaction, and engagement versus disengagement. This is what brings us to why we should look at our strengths. So strengths are actually a human's most direct path to growth, success, and satisfaction. So people who have an opportunity to use their talents every day are 6 times more likely to be engaged in their job. That sounds pretty good for that 2/3 that's struggling. They're 6 times as likely to feel that they get to do what they do best every single day. And they're 3 times as likely to have an excellent quality of life. So that's why we need to look at our strengths, because they're our most direct path to that growth, to that success, and to that satisfaction. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to really explore with you and take you through, what do I mean by strengths? What are strengths? What are weaknesses? We're going to look at the more common model that we all tend to experience, which is a deficit-based environment, and look at what a strengths-based environment is in contrast, and what it has to offer. And then we're going to look at why do we struggle to be in more of a strength mindset versus a deficit-based, so that we can really connect to that. And then we're going to take some time to look at how you can tap more into your strengths so that you can have that success, that growth, and that engagement and satisfaction in life and in work that we're looking at. So to get us started as to what do I mean by strengths versus weaknesses, and just a story to kind of frame all of this before we get into the specifics, is I think we're all familiar with Tiger Woods and him being one of the GOATs in golf or in sports in general. So a story about him from the year 2000, when he was going to the British Open that was going to be at St. Andrews Golf Course. And at that time, he was top in the PGA for his drive distance. And perhaps that's something you think of when you think of Tiger Woods, just being the top. He was top for his ability to drive the ball the furthest. But at that time, he was 66th for what they call sand saves, getting out of the sand traps and the bunkers. So here's the deal. When you're going to St. Andrews looking to win a major, St. Andrews is known for having the most sand traps and the most brutal sand traps to get out of. So Tiger, going into this, was going into an environment that perhaps was positioned more for his weakness. And so taking that into account, you might think that they would spend all their time working on how he could get out of the sand traps. But instead, what he and his coach did is they spent more time making his strength, his drive distance better, so they could use his strength to avoid the sand traps and not get into them in the first place. And then they spent some time on sharpening his ability to get out of the sand traps, just enough so that it wasn't detrimental. But where they spent most of their time was investing in his ability to drive the ball the furthest. And the moral of the story is Tiger Woods won the British Open for the first time in his career. So he conquered that course that was more conducive to his weaknesses. And he was the only golfer in the tournament that year to actually not fall into even one sand trap. And so that's what we're talking about, is how when you know your strengths and you can be intentional about them, it'll bring you the success, the growth, and the satisfaction, and it'll help you avoid the burnout. So let's look a little deeper into that. Okay. And perhaps I haven't mentioned this yet. I'm gonna download some information with you guys for about 30 minutes, and then we're definitely gonna have a 30-minute Q&A so that we can definitely have some interaction about what your situation is, what you're wondering about, and where you can take this for yourself. Okay, so it all begins in the brain with our synaptic pathways. So synaptic pathways are really those pathways that connect our neurons with each other for them to communicate. So it's these pulses, these pathways that actually create our impulses. By the time we are 10 or 13, we have formed the synaptic pathways, the majority of the synaptic pathways that we're going to have and use in life. And we have gotten rid of and shed the synaptic pathways that we used the least or haven't grown at that point. So by the age of about 10 or 13, we pretty much have established, for the most part, those pathways that our impulses travel through. So that's pretty amazing to know that that's established by age 10 or 13. Our synaptic pathways, the ones that form and stay, are the ones that we use the most, the ones that we've exposed ourselves to the most. And those that we don't need and don't use as much or haven't exposed ourselves to, they begin to atrophy, they begin to close, they begin to weaken, and as I said, they begin to fall off. So we have the synaptic pathways that we have. So it all starts in the brain. So what does this have to do with strengths? So everyone has talents. So talents are each of our most natural recurring patterns of thought, feeling, or behavior. Otherwise put, they're our most primed synaptic pathways. Those are our talents. Those are the pathways that are most conducive for us to have success. The pathways that are open and ready for us to use, to perform, to react, and to feel and behave. Some examples of what talents could be, for example, are some of us might have the talent to naturally recognize patterns in data and stories, whereas some of us might not have that natural pathway in our brain. Some of us think in an orderly or timely manner. Some of us are really driven to get things started, whereas some of us are more driven to make things happen and to complete things. Some of us have the talent to trust our gut or to confidently take the lead. But in general, our talents, our most primed synaptic pathways, are the things that really describe us. They're the things that really influence our choices, direct our actions, and really help us filter the world. So just because those are our most primed synaptic pathways doesn't mean that they're on autopilot and that they naturally fire for us at their maximum potency at all times. That's where we come in. When you know what your most primed synaptic pathways are, your most natural reoccurring patterns of thought, feeling, or behavior are. So when you have an awareness of what they are, you have an interest in them and an understanding of what they are and how they work, and you make an investment in them. You spend time practicing them, you develop skills, and you add knowledge to them. That's what actually makes them a strength. That's what makes you unstoppable in that area. So a strength is really your ability to deliver consistent, near perfect performance or impact in that area. So that's what a strength is. So, so our talents really are that fruit on the tree, and it's up to us to do what needs to be done for it to ripen and for us to really pluck it off the tree and use it. Or another way to look at it is your talent are the muscles that you have, but your awareness and your investment is what will build them to a point that you can lift more, go faster, and climb higher. So it's not on autopilot. It's really up to us. You have to have that awareness and be intentional about it. And towards the end of this conversation, we're going to talk about what does it mean to be intentional and what kinds of things can we do to be intentional to really grow those muscles. So let's talk about it. What's a weakness? This is not a Pollyanna approach that just says you don't have any weak spots. You don't have to worry about those. So a weakness is quite simply anything that gets in the way of your success. That's it. Very simple. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But for right now, suffice to say, a weakness is anything that gets in your way of success. So that's what a strength is versus a weakness. And so now let's look a little bit at a strength-based approach versus a deficit-based approach. So approaches to personal development. So a deficit-based approach is what is most common in our society and in our workplaces. It's what I see, and it's what the Gallup research has backed up, that the deficit-based approach is what's most common and what we are all working against in order to focus on our strengths. So the deficit-based approach is the most conventional approach to development, and it really starts with the assumption that if we are already good at something, we don't need to worry about it. Its potential is tapped if you're already good at it. And instead, we simply need to just maintain our strengths and start working on our weaknesses as if they're holes in a boat that we need to fill. So the deficit-based approach is focused on maintaining each person's strengths, maintaining them, and working on fixing your weaknesses. It assumes that most behaviors can be learned. It assumes that the best person in a role, that the best people in a role all fit the same criteria. And it assumes that weakness fixing leads to success. When in actuality, the way that those synaptic connections that I was telling you about work, we are really best served to look at a strengths-based approach. So a strengths-based approach starts by focusing on what people do well. It focuses on each person's, I would say, talents and the need to make them a strength. It emphasizes and builds on those strengths to help individuals become even more productive. And so it focuses on each person's strengths, and it believes in knowing your weaknesses and simply managing around them. This is really a difference in where are we putting the focus? Where are we putting the emphasis? Where are we putting the investment and the effort? So in the strengths-based, you focus on your strengths and you build upon them and you manage around your weaknesses. So in this case, the strengths-based approach really knows that only some behaviors can be learned. I'm going to get into that a little bit more, but here's a spoiler alert. It has to do with those synaptic pathways. It also focuses on the fact that the best people that you see in roles, so your top leaders, for example, they deliver the same outcomes. They might be responsible for the same things, but they do it using different behaviors. They use it doing the behaviors that are most conducive to their natural talents and their strengths. And this is the key part. in a strengths-based model, weakness fixing helps prevent failure. It helps prevent failure. It's not a guarantee, but strengths building is what really leads to success. So we're looking at a strengths-based approach and how to lean into that. So this slide, start with joy to get more joy. Weaknesses never develop into strengths. Strengths develop infinitely. So where this nets out the difference between a deficit-based approach versus a strengths-based approach is that the popular notion is that people can excel at anything if they try hard enough. But the truth is, people can learn almost anything. They can't excel at almost anything. And the other thing that the deficit-based approach focuses on is if you try hard enough, you can excel at anything. It's that notion of if you try hard enough, you can excel at anything. That's what leads to the burnout versus focusing on our strengths. So the bottom line is that our strengths are our pre-existing synaptic pathways. And pre-existing synaptic pathways can grow more pathways infinitely and faster. It's just the fact of how our brain works because it's an established, healthy system in our brain. And that is what your brain is more conducive to rather than creating new synaptic pathways. So that's why a person's most direct path to individual growth, success, and satisfaction begins with a primary investment in his or her greatest strengths, because these are our most primed synaptic pathways. Another way of looking at it is your talent, your most established synaptic pathways, your most natural reoccurring patterns of thought, behavior, and feeling. There's something that you can know and something that you can summarize. So your strengths are a targeted list of reality that you can do something with. Whereas your weaknesses or anything other than your strengths, that's an infinite list and it's an infinite goose chase. So basically, when someone is focusing on your weaknesses, they're sharing with you or you're sharing with yourself their perception of what your weaknesses are. And it's an infinite goose chase that we can never fully capture. So the question is, if it is so logical to leverage our strengths, why do we mostly in society, in the workplace, why do we mostly tend to focus on weaknesses? And here's where the psychology comes in. Humans are naturally wired for connection. Our ability to connect with each other and rely upon each other is directly tied to our survival, let alone our happiness and our enlightenment. So our psychology is that we're naturally wired for connection. Because we're naturally wired for connection and we're dependent on connection, we have protective mechanisms against any perceived threats. And so it is when we perceive our weaknesses as threats to someone connecting with us and believing in us. So it's actually an armored protective mechanism. It's actually quite vulnerable to say, here's what I am. Here are my strengths. Here's what I am. And shedding the list of everything that perhaps your synaptic pathways are not. So it's very vulnerable to say, this is what I am, and it's enough for this endeavor. And so it's that protective measure, it's that feeling of vulnerability that makes us armor up and protect ourselves and start trying to fill in the potholes of our weaknesses. So if you're going to embrace a strength-based approach, knowing that your brain is best wired for it, it's going to take the emotional courage to say, this is what I am, this is my key set of strengths, and it's enough for any endeavor. Okay, so that's what a strength is versus a weakness. That's what a strength-based approach, the rationale for following a strength-based approach. We've already looked at, what is it within us that makes us lean towards the deficit-based approach? And how do we embrace that in order to really lean into a strengths-based approach? So now the question is, how do you know what your talents are so that you can invest in them and make them a full strength? So that's where we have to start. So I am trained in the Clifton strengths assessment, but I'm aware that not everyone on this call is or will engage in that. So I wanted to give you some high-level guidelines for you to be able to self-assess perhaps what your talents are, what your most natural occurring thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are versus your weaknesses. So in general, when you are operating from a place of a talent, you typically have to put in little effort and you're getting a very high return. Whereas when you're operating in a place of weakness, you are typically having to put in high effort and you're getting a very low return. Something I want to clarify here is strengths and weaknesses. We're really looking at how you go about something. We're less looking at what kind of tasks you take on. So the idea is that if you and I have the same job, we have to produce the same things and have the same outcomes. But how I go about it should be based on, and how I'll get success and how I'll be energized should come from a different set of behaviors because of my strengths than how you go about it because of your strengths. And that's the key here. So strengths, when you're operating from that place, you feel energized. When you're operating from a place of weakness, you feel drained. When you're operating from a place of strengths, you're coming from your most authentic self versus something that is forced and you're trying to be. Again, strengths is where you feel engaged and you are engaged. When you're operating from a place of weakness, you might be avoiding the behavior or avoiding the task. When you're operating from a place of strength, you're focused and clear versus distracted and confused. You are meeting and exceeding the expectations versus being very consistent, because it all depends on whether or not you can turn it on or turn it off. And you tend to need little guidance versus needing a lot of support and revisiting explanation. So if you're looking to identify your own strengths versus weaknesses, this is some criteria that can help you do that. A little bit more guidance. These are some high-level categories from Clifton Strengths that you can use. And so Clifton Strengths really puts our talents into 4 categories. So you could have talents, you could be very high in executing talents, which are really a motivation to move something toward completion, to get things done and to make it happen. Another category is you could be very high in the influencing talents, where you operate from a place and you get low effort, high return, in inspiring others to see, think, act differently for maximized outcomes. So to help put something in people that didn't already exist to help them move forward in a better way. Another set of talents can be around relationship building. So relationship building talents are really the ability to sense the needs and experience of others for stronger connections and alignment. And another category is strategic thinking, the ability to internally process for better outcomes. So this is to help you. So you could either go to Clifton Strengths and take the assessment and learn what your top talents are, and then you would know what to invest in and how to invest in them. But for the sake of today, if that's something you're not interested in or you haven't done that before, here again are some guidelines for strengths and weaknesses, and here are some areas that you can look. When you are acting in a way that is executing, do you tend to be experiencing the criteria under the strengths or the weaknesses? When you're in the behaviors of influencing, do you tend to see the outcomes of the strengths or the weaknesses and so on? So this should help you start to assess your own strengths. But the main way I recommend it, if this is something that you want to pursue, is to go to the Clifton Strengths and take their assessment, which will help you see, of all the 34 possible talents, which ones are your top ones? What are your top most primed pathways for success? To give you, to dive a little bit deeper, to start to give you a sense. And by the way, you're going to get this slide deck afterwards. I believe Jen is going to send it out to you. So again, I want to share with you a little bit of context from Clifton Strengths to help you assess your own strengths if you don't want to move forward with the assessment or for the sake of the rest of this conversation. So the executing strengths, remember, is a motivation to move something toward completion. They see the world through the potential to take action. They're typically busy and productive. You might be looking at this saying, well, that's me, but that's a thing. It is, it's a thing. These are certain pathways in your brain that have a superpower. And then Clifton Strengths, breaks them down into additional talents that you can see here. So people with executing strengths can have a strong motivation to do, they can have a strong awareness of work, and they can really have the ability to create momentum in any effort. And these are all the different talents and the different ways that you could do that. The relationship building strength, like I said, they sense the experience of others for stronger connections. They are the glue of families, community, and teams. They look at the world through the people side of an experience, an idea, or a process, and they're really driven to interact. Yes, if this is the essence of who you are, it's a thing. And it's a thing that you should be intentional about to energize yourself and to have growth and to have more success. So people with relationship building talents, these are the 9 talents. They have the talent to sense, they have the ability to elevate things in others, and they have the ability to connect. And this breaks down more specifically what types, the ways in which, the different ways in which they could do that. So you might have some or all of these talents for yourself. We're going to go through 2 more, and then we're going to get to, great, Holly, we now know what strengths are. We even know what some of the specific ones are. I do want to get out of a deficit mentality and into a strength mentality. How do I do that? So let me just show you the last 2 forms of or categories of talent. So the influencing theme, like I said, inspires others to see, think, act differently for maximized outcome. These talents are the ability to get people on board, amplify a message, advocate or speak up, attract a following. And these are the people that have a presence. Not only do you know when they've walked in the room, but you know when they're missing. These are talents. These are things to lean into that you can apply to all of your endeavors to catapult you forward and to energize you. In general, influencing strengths create something in others that wouldn't be there otherwise. And these are the myriad of ways, these are the myriad of talents that people that have influencing strengths can do that. So you might have one, some, or all of these. Lastly, strategic thinking. This is our internal processor for better outcomes. These are the people who absorb, analyze, and dream. They stretch us beyond what we can see through information, ideas, data. So people with strong strategic thinking, they provide certainty to themselves, to groups, to endeavors through these ways. They provide efficiency to their life, to their groups, to any effort, and they provide creativity. And these are the more specific ways that they might be able to do that. So when we're talking about what talents might we have, whether or not you take the Clifton assessment, these should help you be able to really look at specific ways of behavior and approaching things. And you can use that criteria I gave you to say, gosh, you know, when I operate from an analytical place, I'm speaking for myself, that's low on my talent, I can feel very drained. And I need a lot of explanation on how to do that. And it's a lot of effort for low return. Whereas when I operate from a relationship place or an influence place, look out, I can move mountains. So this criteria should help you. I guess the last thing I want to say about that is The most empowering part of knowing what your talents are and then intentionally investing in them to make them a strength is that in order to know what your talents are, you really need to come from an authentic place of your experiences. Versus when you're looking at your weaknesses, you're typically looking at how others perceive you. So that's another reason to come from a strengths-based approach versus a deficit place. Looking at the time, we're at 12:35. And we're moving into the last portion, which is, so how do I do this? So once you have a sense of what your talents are, right? Your most primed synaptic pathways in your brain, your most naturally reoccurring patterns of effort, behavior, and thought. Once you have a sense of what those are, it's now time to invest in them. It is your job to take the reins to intentionally invent new ways to nourish those talents, amplify those talents, protect them, which we're going to talk about, and apply them in order to accomplish your tasks and to reach your desired outcomes. If you're going to take a strengths-based approach, you are taking the reins of your own development, your own engagement, and your own happiness. And you're waiting less for your boss to deliver that, the people in your life to deliver that. You're taking a stronger stance and control over your own environment and your own realities. So let's get specific about that. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. Once you know what your talents are, what should you do with them to make them strengths? Well, one thing is you want to look at how you approach an endeavor. So what do I think this endeavor will take? How do my strengths apply to it? And what are the gaps that I just might need to manage? So one example is all of us need to look at health and fitness in our life. Some of us look at it to different degrees, but all of us need to look at how we take care of our bodies. What it takes at its most basic level is it takes exercise, nutrition, information, and progress. It takes that for all of us. But what your approach is to that would be very different if you're coming from a place of strength. So for the sake of time, I won't go through all of these, but for example, someone very high in the thinking strengths would probably research best practices, get that data, understand what the hacks are, and know what the best products are because they've done that research. Whereas someone like me who's very high in relationship wouldn't do any of that because it overwhelms me and it makes me feel like I can't do it. I would focus more on having workout dates because that's doing my fitness through relationship. So how I would go about it to get the same outcome would be very different. But also how I go about it, I would go about it in a way that energizes me forward rather than drain me. That doesn't mean that I don't need to address these things, but it would be further down the road when I already have momentum. What else can you do to intentionally invent ways to turn your talents into strengths? You need to nourish yourself differently based on your strengths versus how I nourish myself based on my strengths. So what do my talents or my strengths need, and what do they crave more of? So you want to honor these things about yourself and actually protect them on your calendar. If you're high in thinking, you need to honor the fact that you need downtime and time to reflect. You might know that about yourself, but think it's not okay. I think you have to squeeze it in after the workday or after your kids are taken care of. This is a very different way of thinking about it. You have to actually say, this is a thing. This is an oxygen mask for me, and I need to actually protect it on my calendar. Someone high in relationship like me needs to interact daily. This webinar is killing me. I need interaction. I need to actually honor that and plan it into my day in order for me to be best at what I do and do what I do best every day. Someone very high in executing, getting things done, moving things forward, you really should identify what is my most productive time of the day, and you need to protect that. For example, if your most productive time of the day is from 2 to 4, and that's a time that there's a lot of meetings at work, how can you get around that? How can you say no to those meetings or see if there's a way to find other times? Because it'll derail you from your most productive time of the day. And influencers need to find intentional ways that they're promoting others or promoting a cause or a message. So you need to honor these things about yourself and be very intentional and protected on your calendar. All right, cruising through these so we can get from Q to A. Conflict, the thing that we don't want to talk about. So when you know your strengths or your talents, you can better understand the role you're playing in conflict, and you can have better understanding of other people to minimize the conflict. What are my strengths trying to contribute right now to this conversation? If you're in thinking, you're probably trying to contribute an optimized approach. Whereas if you're high in relationship in a conflict, you're probably saying, no, I want to talk about our connection and our unity and how this endeavor will make us better as a team. To know what you're trying to contribute, you can call that out and you can work with the other person and see how the two of you could be contributing to the situation rather than conflicting and rubbing. What do I need in this conflict? What do I need right now? If someone high in thinking is struggling in a conflict, it's probably because they're not getting the accuracy that they need. You could speak up and say, hey, I think what's happening for me right now is I feel that we're focusing a little bit more on feelings and understanding, and I need some accuracy. So you see where I'm going with this. What am I protective against? In a conflict, someone high in thinking might start getting their feathers ruffled because they're experiencing ambiguity, and they're going to start getting protective against that. Whereas someone high in relationship is going to start getting protective when they feel we're prioritizing the outcomes over the people. Once you understand that about yourself, you can function very different in a conflict and maybe turn it around to a positive experience. I've got two more for you, and then I think we can open it up. You have to seek different things when you know what your talents are. How can your strengths benefit your community or your team? You need to seek opportunities that are well positioned for your strengths or your talents so you can use them every day and turn them into strengths. You got to make room. What are the things in my life, in my time, in my day that don't serve my strengths? And how do I get around them, minimize them, get rid of them? And what are the things that are in my day in my life that are serving my strengths? How do I make room for those? And how do I be more intentional about those? So you have to seek opportunities and actually do some housekeeping of your life and your calendar based on your talents in order for them to become strengths. So those are the ways in which you can be intentional and invent ways to turn your talents into strengths. And lastly, let's talk about weaknesses. We have them, it's okay. And you simply want to manage your weaknesses. And you're going to get this deck, so I won't go through this too specifically. You can mitigate your weaknesses. You can collaborate with others to compensate. You can also look at what support systems will help your weaknesses. And sometimes it's just, you just got to do it. But again, because we all have parts of our life and our work that we have to do that are not really conducive to our strengths, and we can't seem to find a way to apply our strengths. But I think, again, you want to look at, of the things in my life that I just got to grit my teeth and do it, how much of that, what is the balance? How often am I having to do those? And you want to minimize those times. So that's what strengths are. They're our fastest way to success, growth, and satisfaction. And getting into a strength-based approach is something that you have to be intentional about, and there are ways to do it. Jen?
We have a few questions that have come in, so let me just pull that up, bro. Okay, so the first one says, how much does the way you grow up affect your synaptic pathways, meaning nature versus nurture?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a neuropsychologist, so I will just take my knowledge of talents and strengths and what synaptic pathways are. I guess what I'd say is that's kind of what I like about this approach. It's not necessarily about how did these talents become your talents. It's about meeting yourself where you're at right now with the reality of these are my talents. And now I'm going to be intentional about embellishing them and nourishing them. So first, I would say that. Second, I would say that, yeah, again, your synaptic pathways are developed through exposure and use. So basically between birth and the time you're 10 or 13, when our synaptic pathways are most established, certainly they are affected by what you've been exposed to, what you've had to do, and what you've needed to do, and what you've had the opportunity to do. So I'm sure that your environment impacts that.
The next question, I think you touched on this a little bit, but just maybe if there's any other thoughts. Why do you think leaders are so focused on deficits with teams that they lead?
Yeah. So why do I feel that leaders are so focused on deficits? So first, reiterating what we have here is, I think that it is about what's listed here, which is sort of a protective nature of, well, if this is what we already have going for us, we can just keep that wheel spinning. And how I think oftentimes misinformed leaders are looking for as much of a guarantee that they can get. And so I think that they're looking to say, okay, well, if we already, it's like a checklist, let's just keep going. We already have these things going for us, but this plate isn't spinning. How do we get this plate spinning? And if I have this person long enough, all the plates will be spinning. So I think it's just a misguided understanding of the fact that we can't learn everything, and we certainly can't excel at everything. So I think it's misguided in that sense. The other thing is something that Gallup has studied is it's part of human nature to evaluate others using ourselves as the baseline.
Okay.
So quite frankly, I can evaluate if I'm strong at something. It's how I see the world. It's how I relate to others. It's part of my lens. So if I don't see it in you, because it's so necessary to my success and I understand how it works, I must need to see it in you. So I think that's part of it as well, is if you operate differently than I do, it's a challenge to my understanding of what it takes to be successful.
Great. This question just came in. How do you over-index on playing to your strengths? When does it become a detriment?
How do you over-index? Can you repeat it?
Can you over-index on playing to your strengths? When does it become a detriment?
Yeah. I think that anything is a detriment when there's no humility involved. So again, when you know your talents and you intentionally increase your awareness of them and your investment in them, that's when they become a strength. Part of increasing your awareness, your self-awareness of that talent, is seeing the blind spots that that talent can have. So that is something that if you do the assessment and learn what your top talents are, Clifton does a great job painting the potential blind spots of that talent. And so again, part of turning a talent into a strength is you having a strong awareness and understanding of it. And part of that is understanding the blind spots of that talent. So what's an example I have of that? One of the talents is arranger, and it's under the ability to execute, to get things done. And this is the person who can constantly arrange and rearrange the resources, the steps, the process to pivot and to address what the actual current situation is versus maybe the intention of how it was when you started out. That's an amazing strength to have in life and on a team. However, one of the pitfalls are if you don't couple your arranging with either strong communication or a relationship talent, people get lost with where you are in all of this arranging and rearranging, and you can lose credibility. So see what I'm saying? So it's understanding what the potential pitfalls are of overusing a talent.
We have a few questions that are like this, so I'm going to combine them, but it basically says, how do you know when it's possible to make a role fit your strengths, or if the square peg will never fit into the round hole?
Yeah. I think strengths are less about what you're being asked to do. They're more about how you do it. So there's two sides to this answer. So first, I would say, have you really, like we said, your approaches, have you really sat down, to understand, what does this role take? What part of this role am I struggling with? What does that part truly take? And do I see ways that my talents apply? Perhaps I've been going about it using what I think I should do. I'll give you a quick example, which is here. When I was starting my business, I'd been doing this work for, almost 20 years, but actually declaring it as a business and hanging out a shingle was a different story. And I was really challenged in doing that. And when I looked at my strengths, I turned my coaching on myself. And I realized it was because I thought you should and had to start a business with a business plan. And yeah, it's important and that needs to happen. But for me and my strengths, I'm very high in relationship and influence, and I'm much lower in the thinking and the executing. That wasn't the place for me to start, to get energized, to have initial success, and to build momentum. I needed to start with my relationships and my network, and to just go out and tap into those relationships and to engage. Once I had that, my business plan became clear. So when I changed my approach to something, the endeavor was the same, but when I changed my approach, it became a whole different story for me. So that's one side, is you might be operating with the assumptions of what that role or that part of that role takes. But on the other hand, like we said, we have to seek opportunities that allow us to use our talents every day. So I think that's the audit. I think that's when you have to look and say, I'm actually, this role or the organization, the environment that this role exists in, forces me to operate in what I call your lower register of talents or your weaknesses. And that's when you have to change it.
Okay, the next one says, how can you overcome
Sorry, Jen, let me add one more thing. I
Oh,
think
go
I would
ahead.
also direct this person or these people
Yeah.
here. Whether you do, the Clifton Strengths Assessment or not, I would direct you here. This is your criteria of, is there a way to go about this responsibility or this role where I can feel energized, authentic, and engaged? And if so, I need to pivot my tactics. I need to talk to my manager that it's going to look different. Or are the ways that you have to go about this role creating these outcomes in me? And I think that's part of the evaluation too. Okay.
Good
Go
point.
ahead.
How can you overcome imposter syndrome when maybe you don't feel like you really have strengths?
I feel that. That's I feel that for those people or submitting that. That hit me. I'm not a sciencey person. Like I said, I'm all relationship and influence. And this science says that we all do have talents. And it's just a fact that you do, no matter who you are, period. So I think it's a matter of perhaps tuning out the messages that you've been receiving to lead you to that conclusion and doing your own work to identify what your talents are. I would say someone that is in that place, this work is most important. because it's just a neurological fact that you have talents, that we all do. So it's about, like I said, taking the reins and learning what your talents are, and then using this outline as some guidance for what you can do to nourish yourself in those places, protect those talents, and to get to work. I think another part of knowing your talents and turning them into strengths is you start to become a real clear advocate for yourself. Boundaries just start to happen because you start to understand, okay, this situation or what's being asked of me or how it's being asked of me doesn't capitalize on this. It puts me here. And you start to build a voice.
Mhm. I think we probably have time for two more. So let me just look. One that came in says, do you have tips for working around burnout to find a path to more career fulfillment where maybe, your strengths match more what your career is?
Yeah. So, I mean, let's be real, right? There are a few things that contribute to burnout. A few main things. One of the things is just sheer volume workload. And whether or not you personally have the capacity or professionally have been given the capacity, right? The right technology, the right partnerships, whatever. So that is not something that I can speak to. Can you repeat the second part of the question, Jen?
It said, let me go back to it. Working around burnout to find a path to career fulfillment. What are some tips?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so part of burnout is the volume and the workload. So there's that. And then again, another part is the environment and what are the ceilings that you experience in your environment. And so maybe being able to identify those are kind of the systemic things about where you're at that contribute to it being so hard to accomplish. So you need to identify those and then be able to see, okay, is there anything I can do about these? Is there a way that I can advocate? Is there anything that I can do to change these things, either in the system or how they come into my day? So I think that's one category.
Mhm.
And then the second category is pretty repetitive. I'll be repetitive here. As far as perhaps the part that you can own is, burnout is like we said, it's where you're probably trying to produce new pathways in your brain versus going with the ones that you got. And so similar to the last question, it's about really being able to do that inventory of, am I burnt out because I've been going about this in a way that I thought I should, but it was prior to really knowing my best ways. Now that I know my best ways, can I reinvent how I'm going about these things? And I guess I just want to bring you to that nourish slide. This is what I find with my clients, with the executives that I work with. Something about our talents, something that people don't realize until they learn their talents and maybe work with a coach is like, yeah, but I thought that was no big deal. I thought that's how everybody did it. And it's like, no, this is something that's really unique to you. It's your special sauce. So once you know what your talents are, then you can know what are the things that nourish me based on how my brain works. And then it's about putting those things into place and seeing what's getting in your way that you could shed. What are the things that aren't serving how my brain works? So I think that that's really important.
All right, we have 1 minute, so I am going to wrap up the questions and just end with a quick closing here to thank you, Holly, so much for this. I just got a chat on the side that said this has been wonderful and so helpful. Thank you, Holly and UNH. And then they said, hang in there. Some talents may feel small, but they are more important and useful than you may think they are. Oh, that's so
Oh,
nice.
well said.
Yes.
Hey, those are my wildcats. That's what
Yeah. Looking out for each
we
other. I
do.
love it.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. We want to definitely encourage people to attend future webinars and events. Look on unh.edu/slash alumni, or they're always on our social media accounts. And just letting you know that in less than a month, we're going to start our 603 challenge, April 8th to 12th. And that's going to be a great opportunity to donate to UNH in any amount. It'll be a really valuable gift to the Wildcat community and especially to the students. So thank you in advance for anybody that's able to provide support to your alma mater.
I love the 603 challenge because it's so rare in philanthropy that you can really direct your gift
Yes.
to things that matter to you or you think matter to the future of the institution you care so much about. And the fact that you have that opportunity with the 603 challenge is great.
Yes. Hundreds and hundreds of places on campus, you're right, that you can direct it towards. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.